I switched the samples.
You did what?
Why would her result change? Adrian's voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. We were standing in the kitchen. The same kitchen where we once argued over baby names. Now we were dissecting another woman's pregnancy test. Sienna had just left. Second test positive. He was doing math in his head. Dates, appointments, assumptions. It doesn't make sense, he muttered. It made perfect sense to me, because I already knew why. I looked at him for a long second, studied the tension in his jaw, the fear, not fear of losing me, fear of losing control. Why would her result change? He asked again. And that was the moment I decided to stop protecting him from the truth, because I switched the samples. Silence, no shouting, no dramatics, just impact. His face shifted slowly, like the ground beneath him had moved. You did what? I switched them, I repeated calmly. The air between us changed. This was no longer about her. It was about us. Before we go further, answer this honestly. If you suspected your spouse was preparing to replace you, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait and watch? Subscribe to Twisted Love Tales with Mr. Easton if you believe love deserves clarity, because this confession was only the beginning. You switched them, he said again, like repetition might soften it. Yes, I didn't flinch. I didn't justify it yet. He stared at me as if I had become someone unfamiliar. You're not that kind of person. That almost made me laugh. For 7 years, I was the calm one, the patient one, the woman who handled infertility with grace, while my body absorbed injections and disappointment. But pain stretches you. 2 years of negative tests, 2 years of watching him pull away, 2 years of intimacy that felt scheduled instead of desired. When Sienna thought she was pregnant, he didn't look relieved when the first result came back negative. He looked disappointed. That told me everything. I needed to know something, I said. Know what? If you were choosing me, or choosing fatherhood. His expression hardened. That's manipulative. No, I replied. It's clarity. Let me ask you something. If someone says they love you, but their actions lean elsewhere, do you trust the words or the behavior? Comment below. Because the moment I switched those samples, I wasn't acting out of rage. I was measuring truth. And what I saw in the weeks after almost broke me. You tested me, Adrian said quietly. Yes, there was no point denying it. He walked a few steps away, processing, not yelling, not exploding, just absorbing. You could have talked to me. I tried, I said. That stopped him. Infertility does not just affect a woman. It attacks a man's pride. Every negative result made him feel smaller. He never said it directly, but I saw it in the way he avoided eye contact after appointments. Instead of sharing that insecurity, he looked for proof somewhere else. I felt like I was failing you, he admitted. And instead of telling me that, I replied, you tried to prove yourself with someone else. Silence. That was the real betrayal. Not the affair. The withdrawal. The emotional absence. If someone feels inadequate, they have 2 options. Communicate. Or compensate. He chose compensation, so I chose exposure. Pause here. Have you ever stayed quiet just to see what someone would choose when they thought you weren't looking? Because what he chose told me more than any apology ever could. And we're still not at the beginning. Let me show you how we got here. I switched my husband's mistress's pregnancy test. Not out of rage, out of necessity. For 2 years, I tried to give him a child. Hormones, timetables, silent prayers in sterile rooms. He said we had time, but when another woman said she might be pregnant, he didn't panic. He prepared. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about love. It was about identity. He needed proof he wasn't broken. So I made one move. At the clinic, while the nurse stepped away, I switched the samples. Not the labels, just the cups. I wanted to see something. If he believed I was pregnant, would he stay for me? If he believed she was pregnant, would he leave? Simple, clear, unfiltered. Let me ask you directly. If someone is ready to build a life without you while still sleeping beside you, are you wrong for wanting the truth exposed? Comment below. I want your honest answer. Subscribe to Twisted Love Tales with Mr. Easton if you believe marriage should survive honesty, because this story is not about a test result. It's about character, and character shows itself when certainty is on the table. After I confessed, the house felt smaller. You played with people's lives, Adrian said. No, I replied. I revealed yours. That ended the debate. The clinic later confirmed the truth through blood work. I was not pregnant. The first positive result belonged to her, but by the time the correction came, I had already seen what I needed. When he believed I was carrying his child, he transformed. Attentive, present, hopeful. When he believed she was, he was ready to pivot. That difference changed everything. You didn't trust me, he said quietly. I trusted your behavior, I answered. And behavior does not lie. If you think this story is about revenge, you're wrong. It's about what 2 years of silence can do to a marriage. It's about ego, insecurity, and the cost of emotional distance. Right now, you know the ending of this moment, but you don't know how we got here. You don't know what infertility did to us. You don't know when he started slipping away. Let me take you back, 7 years earlier, to the version of us everyone envied. 7 years earlier, before clinics and secrets, Adrian and I were the couple people pointed at with admiration. We met at a finance conference in Chicago. He was sharp, confident, always 3 steps ahead in conversation. I challenged him during a panel discussion. He laughed afterward and said he wasn't used to being questioned that way. That was how it started. Not fireworks. Respect. Our early years were full of movement, business growth, travel, late-night planning sessions at the dining table. We were partners in every sense. If he expanded his firm, I adjusted my schedule to attend investor dinners. If I wanted to launch a consulting arm of my own, he stayed up helping me build projections. We made decisions together. We disagreed intelligently. We built momentum. By year 3, we had moved into our ocean view home. Clean white interiors, glass walls that reflected sunset light across the living room. It felt earned. People often said we balanced each other. He was bold. I was steady. He chased risk. I measured it. We talked about children casually back then. One day, he would say, brushing hair from my face. It felt distant, not urgent. Year 5 was when the conversation shifted. Our friends started announcing pregnancies. Baby showers filled our calendar. Family members began asking subtle questions. When are you two starting your family? We would smile. Soon. Back then, it felt like timing. We had no idea timing would turn into testing, and testing would turn into pressure neither of us fully understood. From the outside, nothing about our life suggested weakness. Our home overlooked the water. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Minimalist design. Neutral tones. Everything intentional. Adrian's firm expanded aggressively during those years. He made partner before 40. His name appeared in business journals. Invitations to speak at leadership panels became routine. At events, people leaned toward us when we entered a room. We looked aligned, successful, stable. I learned how to host dinners that blended investors with close friends. Conversations about venture capital flowed beside discussions about art and travel. Adrian thrived in that space. He liked being admired. And I liked seeing him confident. We were not flashy. We were strategic. Vacations in Italy. Weekend escapes to Napa. Quiet luxury, never loud display. On social media, our life looked effortless. Sunset photos on the balcony. Anniversary tributes. Carefully framed celebrations. No one saw the conversations that ended early when the topic shifted to children. No one noticed how I lingered a little too long holding our friends' babies before handing them back. Publicly, we were admired. Privately, a question started growing between us. When? At first, we dismissed it. We were healthy, young enough, successful. There was no reason to think something might resist us. But admiration from others does not protect you from private disappointment. And the more people praised our life, the harder it became to admit something felt incomplete. Pressure does not always enter loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, disguised as expectation. When we decided to try for a baby, it felt hopeful. We stopped using protection, downloaded cycle tracking apps, talked about nursery colors as if it were a design project. The first few months were almost playful. "Maybe this is the month," he would say. I would smile and agree. When the first test came back negative, we brushed it off. "Normal," he said. The second month passed. Negative, again. By month 4, the tone shifted slightly. Not worry, just focus. I started researching ovulation windows, adjusted my diet, reduced caffeine, increased supplements. It became structured. By month 6, I scheduled our first doctor's appointment. The clinic was calm, clean, professional. The doctor reassured us. "It can take time." Adrian squeezed my hand during that visit. He looked confident. Year 1 ended with 12 negative tests. That was when optimism turned into effort. We moved from hoping to managing. Appointments became regular. Blood work, hormone panels, ultrasounds. Each visit carried anticipation followed by measured disappointment. I learned to read my body with clinical precision. He learned to read my face before I spoke. We still held each other at night. We still said, "It will happen." But something subtle shifted. Trying stopped being romantic. It became scheduled, timed, purpose-driven. And that change, small as it seemed, began altering the way we touched each other. Year 2 introduced medication, hormone injections. I remember the first time I held the syringe in my hand. Adrian insisted on doing it for me. He said it made him feel involved. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, while he pressed the needle into my abdomen carefully. His hands were steady. Mine weren't. The side effects came quickly: mood swings, fatigue, bloating that made me feel unlike myself. The clinic became a second home. Early morning blood draws, waiting rooms filled with women avoiding eye contact. Every cycle began with cautious optimism and ended with quiet grief. Negative, negative, negative. Each result landed heavier than the last. I began to brace myself before checking the test strip. Adrian changed too. At first he reassured me constantly. "We'll figure it out. There's no rush." But as months passed, his reassurance became shorter, less frequent. He spent longer hours at work. He started taking calls outside. He didn't complain. He didn't blame. He withdrew. Infertility has a way of attacking identity. For me, it felt physical. For him, it felt personal. And I began to sense that he was internalizing each failed attempt as something deeper than biology. Adrian never said he felt inadequate. He didn't need to. I saw it in small moments. After doctor appointments, he would drive in silence, eyes fixed ahead, jaw tight. When friends announced pregnancies, he congratulated them enthusiastically. Later that night, he would scroll through emails longer than necessary. He stopped initiating conversations about how I was feeling. Instead, he focused on logistics. What did the doctor say? What's the next step? Efficiency replaced empathy. He began dressing sharper for work. New suits, different cologne, subtle shifts that suggested he needed control somewhere. He started working later. Big deal closing. Important client dinner. I wanted to believe him. But distance is rarely accidental. When we lay in bed, he faced the opposite direction more often. Not every night. Just enough for me to notice. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't hostile. He was retreating. There is a difference. Men are often taught to tie worth to performance, career, strength, fatherhood. If one area falters, they compensate elsewhere. I began to sense he was trying to prove something, not to me, to himself. And I started asking a quiet question I was afraid to say aloud. Does pressure strengthen love? Or does it expose insecurity? Let us know in the comments. I want your perspective before we continue, because what happened next did not begin with confrontation. It began with distance. There was a time when Adrian touched me without thinking, passing me in the kitchen, pulling me close while I cooked, kissing my shoulder absent-mindedly. That changed. By the second year of trying, intimacy followed a schedule. Apps told us the optimal days. Reminders popped up. Conversations shifted from desire to timing. "Tonight is important," he would say. Not the first want you. Important. Clinical. Purpose-driven. I began to feel like a project instead of a partner. Afterward, he would lie still, staring at the ceiling, as if waiting for confirmation that effort would equal outcome. Romance faded under responsibility. We stopped being spontaneous. We became strategic. And strategy has no warmth. I miss the version of us that laughed in the middle of the night, that reached for each other without calculation. I tried to initiate closeness outside the schedule. Sometimes he responded. Sometimes he claimed exhaustion. The rejection wasn't loud. It was subtle. Small declines. Small hesitations. But small things accumulate. And in that quiet shift, I started to feel alone inside my own marriage. Not abandoned, but sidelined. The deeper truth was this. Adrian's pride was tied to fatherhood, not because he said it directly, because of how he reacted to failure. Each negative result felt like a verdict against his masculinity. He began researching male fertility quietly. I found browser tabs open one evening. He closed them quickly. "I'm fine," he said. But the need to prove himself grew. He wanted certainty. He wanted confirmation that nothing was wrong with him. And when certainty didn't come from me, he looked elsewhere. I didn't see it immediately. The signs were subtle. Extra attention to appearance, more time networking, guarded phone habits. Then one night, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the dresser beside me. I didn't mean to look, but the screen lit up. "I'm late."
I'm late. I'm scared.
But the screen lit up. "I'm late. I'm scared." The message was from Sienna Vale. 3 words changed everything. Late, scared, and implied possibility. I stared at the screen long enough to feel my pulse in my ears. This wasn't flirtation. This was potential proof, not just of betrayal, of capability. My hands felt cold. The bathroom door was still running with water. I had seconds to decide what kind of wife I would be. Confrontational, silent, or observant. I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it was. When he stepped out of the shower, I said nothing. But something inside me shifted, and that was the moment our marriage stopped being private. Because I needed to know where he would go next. Sienna Vale had worked with Adrian's firm for almost a year before I paid real attention to her. She was sharp, polished, the kind of woman who understood how to hold eye contact a second longer than necessary. Not inappropriate, just deliberate. At corporate events, she laughed easily at his comments. She stood close when discussing numbers. Her confidence matched his pace. I noticed it, but I did not label it. In our world, proximity was normal. Consultants worked late. Deals required collaboration. I trusted structure. The first time I felt discomfort was subtle. We were hosting a dinner for clients. Sienna arrived in a fitted navy dress, professional yet intentional. When Adrian introduced us, her handshake was firm. Her smile measured. "Bianca, I've heard so much about you," she said. Her tone was respectful, but her eyes studied me. That night, I caught Adrian watching her once across the table. Not lust, calculation. I dismissed it. Strong women do not compete with ghosts. Months passed. Her name surfaced more frequently. Sienna suggested this strategy. Sienna is leading that account. Sienna might travel with us for the conference. It all sounded reasonable. There were no obvious red flags. No lipstick on collars. No suspicious hotel receipts. Just familiarity growing in professional spaces. And that is how most boundaries blur. Not through chaos, through comfort. I did not know then that comfort would become collaboration. And collaboration would become something else entirely. When I saw the message, I did not confront him. "I'm late. I'm scared." 3 words. They could mean many things, but given our 2-year struggle, they meant one thing clearly. Possibility. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, then placed it back exactly where it was. When Adrian stepped out of the shower, I acted normal. I asked about his day. He answered casually. I watched. That became my strategy. Not anger, not accusations, observation. The next morning, he left earlier than usual. Claimed an early meeting. I checked our shared calendar. No early meeting scheduled. That detail mattered. Over the next week, I noticed patterns. He started stepping outside to take calls. He changed his phone password. He kept it face down on the table. Subtle adjustments, small defenses. If I confronted him too soon, he would deny it. hide it better. I needed clarity. I needed to see whether this was emotional weakness or calculated intent. So I became quiet, more attentive. I asked neutral questions. How's the new account going? Is Sienna still leading that project? He answered easily. Too easily. Silence is powerful when used strategically. He thought I was unaware, and that gave me access to the truth he would never volunteer. Adrian had never been secretive with his phone before. We shared passwords casually, borrowed each other's devices without tension. That changed after the message. He began carrying it everywhere, even short trips to the kitchen. Notifications were silenced. When it buzzed, he glanced at it quickly, then flipped it over. Once, during dinner, it lit up briefly beside his plate. I saw her name before he turned it face down. He did not excuse himself. He simply continued eating as if nothing had happened. That composure told me something. This was not impulsive. It was contained. Late at night, after he thought I was asleep, I heard faint typing beside me. The glow of the screen reflected off the wall. I kept my breathing steady. If he sensed suspicion, he would tighten access. So I gave him comfort. I did not ask to see his phone. I did not demand explanations. Instead, I paid attention to timing. The calls often happened around the same hour. The messages clustered in the evenings. Patterns reveal intention, and patterns were forming. This was not reckless passion. There were no dramatic arguments or emotional confessions. There was coordination, secrecy born from strategy, not heat. And that realization unsettled me more than any romantic betrayal could have. Client dinner, board review, networking event, the late meetings multiplied. At first, they sounded legitimate. Adrian's firm was expanding. Growth required presence. But the frequency increased. 2 nights a week became 3. 3 became 4. He returned home composed, not disheveled. No scent of perfume. No visible signs, just distance. He would shower immediately, change into sleepwear, open his laptop briefly, as if maintaining routine. I asked once, casually, which client? He named one confidently. I checked his firm's website later. That client's contract had closed months earlier. Another detail, another quiet confirmation. He was not sloppy. He was selective. One evening, I drove past his office building at 9:30 p.m. The lights were off. The parking lot nearly empty. His car was not there. I did not call him. I drove home. If I confronted him without proof, he would shift the narrative. I needed evidence of direction. Was this emotional attachment, or a calculated attempt to secure something he felt denied at home? By then, I suspected the answer. This was not about romance. It was about validation, and validation becomes addictive when pride feels threatened. The night I followed him, I told myself I was simply confirming a suspicion. He said he had a strategy session across town. I waited 10 minutes after he left, then got in my car. I kept distance, enough to avoid detection, close enough not to lose him. He did not drive toward downtown. He turned in the opposite direction, toward the medical district. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Maybe he had a meeting nearby. Maybe I was wrong. He slowed near a quiet building with tinted windows and a discreet sign. I parked across the street. The sign read, Advanced Reproductive Health Center, not our clinic, not the one we had been visiting for 2 years. This was private, smaller, exclusive. I watched him step out of the car. He adjusted his jacket, checked his phone, entered. He did not look conflicted. He looked focused. That was the moment everything shifted. This was not accidental intimacy. This was preparation. He was not seeking comfort. He was seeking confirmation. Confirmation that he could father a child. Confirmation that he was not the problem. I sat in my car for several minutes after he went inside, not crying, not shaking, just thinking. If Sienna was there too, this was no longer speculation. This was planning. The next day, I researched the clinic. Private consultations, discreet services, on-site testing, minimal wait times. It catered to clients who valued confidentiality. I recognized the type. Men who needed answers without public exposure. Women who wanted swift results. The fact that he chose a different clinic mattered. If this were emotional recklessness, they would rely on home tests. Instead, he selected a facility known for precision. I replayed our conversations over the past months, his growing distance, his frustration, his need to prove something. This clinic was not about her alone. It was about him. I imagined him sitting in that waiting room, offering samples, discussing timelines, discussing conception. The thought did not ignite rage. It triggered clarity. He was constructing an alternative future quietly. If she was pregnant, he would not hesitate. He would pivot. He would rationalize. He would claim destiny. That realization stripped the situation of romance. There was no poetry here. No stolen kisses under city lights. Just a man trying to reclaim his sense of worth through biology. And that made the betrayal colder, because it meant I was not replaced for love. I was replaced for proof. Affairs born of passion are chaotic. This was not chaotic. It was measured. He coordinated appointments. He scheduled private consultations. He managed communication carefully. This was not about desire overwhelming reason. This was reason justifying desire. He wanted to confirm he could create life. He wanted a result that would silence doubt. And if that result came from another woman, he was prepared to accept it. That understanding changed everything inside me. I stopped viewing Sienna as competition. She was opportunity. Opportunity for him to restore his pride. Which meant I needed to see something clearly. If she became pregnant, would he choose her because he loved her? Or because she carried proof? There was only one way to know. I called the clinic, booked an appointment under my own name. Same week, same building, same hallway he had walked into. My voice did not shake when I scheduled it. The receptionist confirmed the time calmly. After I hung up, I sat still for a long moment. This was no longer about catching him. It was about testing him. If certainty shifted his loyalty, I needed to witness it myself. And that is how I ended up sitting in that waiting room beside her. Waiting for the nurse to call our names. The clinic waiting room was smaller than I expected. Soft beige chairs lined the walls. A low table held neatly stacked magazines no one was reading. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. I checked in at the front desk, gave my name, and took a seat near the window. 2 minutes later, Sienna walked in. She paused when she saw me. Surprise flickered across her face, followed quickly by composure. "Bianca," she said, polite but guarded. "Sienna." We exchanged restrained smiles. No accusation, no explanation. Just two women sitting in the same room for the same reason. She chose a seat across from me, close enough that I could notice the way her fingers rested lightly against her abdomen. Not dramatically, not performative. Protective. That gesture told me she believed it. She believed she might be carrying his child. I lowered my gaze to my phone to avoid staring. The television mounted on the wall played a muted daytime talk show. A couple across the room whispered to each other, their anxiety visible in small movements. My chest felt tight, but my face remained neutral. This was the first time I had seen the possibility of her pregnancy in physical form, not just words on a screen. If she was right, this waiting room was the beginning of my exit. If she was wrong, it was still proof that he was trying. The nurse called another name. The clock ticked forward, and I realized something. This was not a dramatic confrontation, it was quiet competition, and neither of us had said a word about it. While we waited, I observed her without appearing to. Her posture was careful, shoulders slightly back, chin lifted, but her hand kept returning to the same place. Her lower abdomen, not dramatically cradling it, just resting there, almost unconsciously. Every few minutes she would press her palm gently against her stomach, as if reassuring herself. I wondered how long she had known. Was she the one who suggested this clinic? Did Adrian sit beside her in this same room days earlier? Did he hold her hand the way he once held mine during our appointments? That thought stung. She avoided eye contact with me after our initial greeting. Her foot tapped lightly against the floor. Controlled nerves. She wasn't arrogant. She was anxious, which meant she cared about the outcome. That detail mattered. If this had been a casual affair, she wouldn't be here seeking medical confirmation. This was investment. A nurse stepped out briefly to call another patient. As she walked past, I noticed the clipboard in her hand labeled on site testing. Everything here was efficient, immediate, definitive. Sienna exhaled slowly and adjusted her jacket. In that moment, I saw something clearly. She wasn't just hoping to be pregnant, she was hoping for position, and if the result came back positive, she would no longer be hidden. She would have leverage. My pulse quickened, not from jealousy, from clarity. The stakes were no longer emotional, they were structural, and I was sitting directly across from the woman who might change my entire life. When my name was called, I stood first. Sienna glanced up briefly but said nothing. The nurse led me down a short hallway with muted lighting and closed doors on either side. Inside a small restroom, she handed me a labeled plastic cup and explained the process. "Place the sample on the counter outside when you're done," she said gently. "We'll process it right away." The room was sterile, bright, functional. I stared at the cup in my hand longer than necessary. My name was printed clearly on the label. Laurent, Bianca. I completed the sample and stepped into the hallway. Across from the restroom was a small processing station behind a half door. On the counter, 2 trays waited. Each tray held a labeled cup. Mine, and another with Sienna's name. The nurse placed mine on the left tray and walked toward a side office, mentioning she needed paperwork. I noticed everything in that second. The distance between trays, the open half door, the quiet hallway. No cameras visible, no one watching. My breathing slowed. This was not chaos. It was opportunity. The labels were correct. The trays were separate. The only thing separating truth from illusion was placement. I could walk away, wait for fate to decide, or I could intervene. The nurse's footsteps faded into another room. The hallway fell silent, and time narrowed into a single choice. My hand hovered near the trays. I had never done anything deceptive in my marriage before. I valued honesty, structure, integrity. Switching those samples would cross a line I could not uncross. If I left everything untouched, I would receive whatever result biology delivered. If she was pregnant, I would watch my husband pivot towards certainty. If I switched them, I would gain something different. Information, not about pregnancy. Would he change overnight if he believed I was carrying his child? Would he stay distant if she was confirmed instead? This was not revenge. It was measurement. But measurement through manipulation is still manipulation. My pulse thudded in my ears. I pictured the 2 years behind us. The injections, the scheduled intimacy, the growing silence. I pictured him at this clinic days earlier, providing samples, discussing timelines, seeking validation, and I realized something. He had already crossed a line. I was simply responding. The nurse's voice echoed faintly in another room. No footsteps yet. This was the window. I inhaled slowly. If I was going to do this, I had to be precise. No hesitation, no fumbling. One movement, one decision. And whatever followed would be the truth I forced into the light. I stepped behind the half-open door, calm, controlled. My fingers moved first to Sienna's cup, then to mine. The labels stayed exactly where they were. I lifted both trays carefully. No shaking, no noise. I exchanged the cups. Left became right, right became left. Simple. The action itself took less than 3 seconds, but it carried the weight of everything that had led me here. I set the trays back down in their original positions, aligned, undisturbed. From a distance, nothing looked different. My face remained neutral. I stepped back into the waiting area and took my seat. Sienna glanced at me briefly, searching. I met her gaze calmly. The nurse returned to the station moments later and began processing the trays. No suspicion, no pause, just routine procedure. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain it could be heard. But my posture remained steady. This was the moment I crossed a boundary. Not loudly, not recklessly, deliberately. Whatever result came next would alter the direction of 3 lives, and I had set it in motion. There was no turning back now. The nurse stepped into the waiting room with a clipboard. "Sienna Vale?" Sienna stood immediately. Her shoulders were tense. She disappeared down the hallway. Every second stretched. I stared at the floor tiles, counting patterns to steady myself. This was no longer about whether she was pregnant. It was about what her reaction would reveal. 5 minutes passed. Then the door opened. Sienna walked out. Her face had changed. The composure was gone. Her eyes looked glossy. Her lips pressed tightly together. She avoided looking at me as she walked past. Negative. I did not need confirmation. Her body said it. She moved quickly toward the exit without speaking to the front desk. The automatic doors closed behind her. Silence filled the room. The nurse looked at her clipboard again. Bianca Laurent? I stood. My legs felt steady despite the storm in my chest. As I walked down the hallway, one thought repeated in my mind. This is it. Whatever number appears on that test will not just confirm pregnancy. It will confirm character. And I was about to hand my husband the illusion he thought he wanted. When I stepped into the consultation room, the doctor greeted me with a soft smile. She held a thin folder in her hand. Your urine test came back positive, she said gently. Congratulations. The word landed in the air between us. Positive. For 2 years, that word had felt distant, imaginary, reserved for other women in other waiting rooms. Now it belonged to me. Except, it didn't. I nodded, as if absorbing good news. My expression measured. My breathing controlled. The doctor began explaining next steps. Blood confirmation, hormone monitoring, prenatal scheduling. Her voice faded in and out. This was the result I had engineered, not to fake a pregnancy, but to observe a reaction. I walked out of the clinic holding a printed report that could redirect my entire marriage. The paper felt heavier than it should have. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel for several minutes. This was the fork in the road. If I handed Adrian that result, he would believe I was carrying his child. He would believe our struggle had ended. And whatever he did next would answer the question that had haunted me for months. Was I his choice? Or was fatherhood his priority? I drove home slowly, rehearsing nothing. I would not script his reaction in my mind. I wanted it raw, unfiltered. That evening, he walked through the door, looking tired but alert, watching me carefully. She thought she was pregnant, he said cautiously. It was nothing. I held the report in my hand. I took a test too, I said. His eyes sharpened. And I placed the paper on the counter between us. Positive. And then I waited. For a moment, Adrian didn't move. He stared at the paper as if it might rearrange itself into something safer. Then his breath caught. Bianca. He stepped closer, picked up the report. Read it again. Positive. His shoulders shifted first. The tension he had carried for months seemed to loosen instantly. He looked at me differently, not with suspicion, with relief. He crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps and pulled me into him. His arms were tight, urgent. We did it, he whispered against my hair. We did it. We. That word felt unfamiliar after so much distance. He kissed my forehead, my temple, my lips. He hadn't moved toward me like that in months. His voice softened. This changes everything. There was emotion in his eyes. Not subtle, not restrained. Hope. But beneath that hope, I saw something else. Validation. He wasn't just happy for us. He looked restored, like something broken inside him had been repaired. He began talking rapidly. We need to call the doctor tomorrow. I'll clear my schedule. We should tell your mother soon. No, maybe wait. Let's confirm with blood work first. His mind was racing ahead into planning mode. I watched him carefully. He hadn't asked how I felt. He hadn't asked if I was scared. He hadn't even questioned the timing. His relief centered on outcome, not partnership. He pulled back slightly and placed his hand against my abdomen, reverent. Finally, he said. That word echoed. Finally, as if a verdict had been overturned, as if he had proven something. And in that moment, I knew this test had already begun revealing more than pregnancy ever could. The change was immediate. The next morning, Adrian canceled 2 meetings without hesitation. He came home early that evening. No client dinners, no late strategy sessions. He cooked dinner himself, something he hadn't done in over a year. He asked how I was feeling 3 times in 1 hour. He insisted I sit while he cleared the table. Over the next week, he adjusted his entire rhythm. He stopped taking calls outside. His phone remained face up on the counter again. He reactivated the shared calendar access. Small gestures, noticeable shifts. He placed his palm against my stomach often, as if confirming the reality of what he believed was growing there. He began researching prenatal vitamins and nursery furniture. He sent me articles about first trimester nutrition. He even turned down a weekend business trip, claiming he didn't want to leave me alone. From the outside, it looked like devotion. From inside, it felt conditional. The distance that had existed for months dissolved overnight. Not gradually, instantly. That speed unsettled me. Love does not usually reappear like a switch being flipped. Fear does. Validation does. If the pregnancy represented proof of his masculinity, then of course his confidence returned. He walked differently, stood taller, spoke with renewed certainty. At dinner one night, he said quietly, "I knew it wasn't me." There it was. Not "I'm grateful," not "I'm relieved for us." Proof. This transformation was not rooted in intimacy. It was rooted in identity, and I was still watching. Within 2 weeks, our home began shifting. Adrian cleared out the guest room without being asked. He measured wall space for a crib, compared brands online, debated stroller safety ratings. He started talking about schools. "We should think long-term," he said. "Public versus private. Long-term." He hadn't planned long-term with me in months. Now every conversation projected forward. He discussed scaling back his hours once the baby arrived, mentioned delegating more responsibility at the firm. He even suggested we start a college savings account early. His enthusiasm was structured, practical, focused. One evening, while reviewing potential paint colors for the nursery, he said something that lingered. "This makes everything worth it." Everything. I studied him. "What do you mean?" I asked lightly. "All the pressure, the uncertainty. It's worth it now. Now. Because of outcome, not because of growth." He seemed almost grateful to the struggle for delivering proof. But the struggle had nearly broken us. And he hadn't fought for us when the result was uncertain. He was fighting now because the result favored him. As he spoke about cribs and insurance plans, I asked myself a question I couldn't silence. If the test had come back negative, would he still be here measuring walls? Or would he be at another clinic, searching for confirmation elsewhere? That question settled into my chest quietly, and it refused to leave. The physical closeness returned too, but differently. He reached for me often, held me longer, kissed my forehead before leaving for work. At night, he wrapped his arm protectively around my waist, hand resting over my stomach. He spoke softly to what he believed was our child. "I've got you," he whispered once. I lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't said that to me during the worst months. He hadn't held me when I cried quietly after another negative test. He hadn't said, "I've got you," when my body felt like it was failing. Now that he believed I carried his child, the tenderness returned. It was real, but it was activated by outcome. That distinction mattered. One evening, he sat beside me on the couch and said, "I'm sorry I've been distant." The apology was brief, vague. I was under pressure. Pressure, not temptation, not emotional betrayal, just pressure. I nodded but said little. Inside, I was measuring every word, every gesture, every shift, because the question remained, is he choosing me, or is he choosing fatherhood? Pause for a moment. If love returns only when there is a child involved, is that love or fear? Comment below, like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what happened next removed all doubt. 3 weeks after the clinic visit, the doorbell rang at 7:40 p.m. Adrian was reviewing emails at the dining table. I was folding laundry in the living room. He glanced toward the door. "Are you expecting anyone?" "No." He stood and walked toward the entrance. When he opened it, his body stiffened. I could see her over his shoulder. Sienna. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. Eyes swollen. She looked smaller than usual. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. The air shifted instantly. Adrian hesitated before stepping aside. She walked into our home carefully, as if aware she was crossing a boundary. "I took another test," she said. My heart slowed. "And?" Adrian asked. She swallowed. It's positive. The word landed differently this time. Not relief. Not hope. Confusion. I don't understand, she continued. The clinic said negative. But I tested again this week. Twice. Both positive. Silence filled the room. Adrian's eyes moved between us rapidly. That doesn't make sense, he said. The timeline began rearranging itself in his mind. Dates overlapped. Possibilities multiplied. Sienna's hands trembled slightly. I thought you should know, she added. No. The certainty he had rebuilt inside himself began to crack. Because if she was pregnant too, the illusion shifted. This was no longer proof. It was complication. Adrian turned slowly toward me. There's something off about this, he said. He was right. There was. And I was about to tell him exactly what it was. The room felt smaller after Sienna spoke. It's positive. Adrian stepped back slightly, as if distance would create logic. That's not possible, he said. The clinic confirmed negative. Sienna shook her head. I tested twice this week. Both positive. I stayed seated, silent, observing. Adrian began doing what he always does when faced with uncertainty. He reconstructed events. When did you test again? He asked. Monday, she replied. And Wednesday? He counted backwards. I watched his lips move slightly as he calculated dates in his head. But the clinic visit was 3 weeks ago, he said slowly. Yes, that would mean. He stopped. The timeline refused to align cleanly. If she was pregnant, conception could have happened before the clinic test. Or after. Or somewhere in between. Uncertainty spread across his face. For weeks, he had been grounded in confidence, restored by what he believed was proof. Now that certainty fractured. He looked at me briefly, as if searching for reassurance. I offered none. Sienna stood near the doorway, her posture uncertain for the first time since I'd known her. I wouldn't have come here if I wasn't sure, she said. Sure. The word echoed in a room full of doubt. Adrian rubbed his temples. This doesn't make sense, he repeated. And I realized something in that moment. He wasn't upset about betrayal being exposed. He was upset that clarity was slipping. He had built a clean narrative in his mind. Bianca pregnant. Marriage restored. Sienna negative. Affair concluded. Now the lines blurred. And blurred lines are dangerous when your identity depends on certainty. Adrian began asking questions carefully. When was your last cycle? He asked Sienna. She answered quietly. The dates overlapped. Uncomfortably. If her current positive result was accurate, conception could have occurred either shortly before or shortly after the clinic visit, meaning the negative result weeks ago might have been too early to detect anything. Or something else. He turned toward me. We need to check your dates too, he said. I held his gaze. My cycle hasn't shifted, I replied calmly. His expression flickered. He began recounting the timeline aloud. When we got your positive result, he said to me, that was the same week she tested negative. Yes. And now she's positive. Yes. And you haven't confirmed with blood work yet. Not yet. The air thickened. If both results were true, the overlap suggested something he wasn't prepared to face. Possibility. 2 pregnancies. Or none. Or error. The simplicity he had leaned on for weeks dissolved into complexity. Sienna looked between us, confused and increasingly uneasy. I didn't know she was testing too, she said softly. That statement shifted the room. She hadn't known. He hadn't told her. He had been living 2 separate narratives, and now they were colliding in one space. For the first time, Adrian looked unsettled in a way I hadn't seen before. Not defensive, not confident, uncertain. And uncertainty stripped him of the authority he had been clinging to. After Sienna left, the house fell into heavy silence. Adrian paced the living room. This doesn't add up, he muttered. His calm strategist persona began to crack. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. We need to verify everything, he said. Blood work, documentation. There has to be an explanation. His voice carried tension now. Not pride. Fear. I watched him closely. When he believed I was pregnant and she was not, he moved with confidence. Decisions were easy. Plans flowed naturally. Now that both outcomes were uncertain, He looked destabilized. What if the clinic mixed something up? He asked suddenly. There it was. Blame redirected outward. It's possible, I said evenly. He nodded quickly, seizing the idea. Yes, that's possible. Maybe samples were mishandled. Maybe labels were wrong. He wanted an external fault, not moral failure, not personal responsibility, a mistake he could point to and fix. His breathing quickened slightly as he constructed explanations. We'll call them first thing in the morning, he said. This needs clarity. Clarity, the same word I had been chasing for months. But his version of clarity was different. He wanted reassurance. I wanted truth. He turned toward me. You're not worried? He asked. I considered that carefully. No, I said. And that answer unsettled him more than anger would have. Because anxiety exposes where your stability rests, and his stability had been resting on proof. Proof that he was capable. Proof that he wasn't failing. Without that proof, he looked smaller, more human, more exposed. The next morning, Adrian called the clinic. I listened from the kitchen as he spoke to the receptionist. Yes, there were 2 tests that day, he said carefully. 1 positive, 1 negative. Pause. Yes, I understand procedures are followed, but is there any chance of sample confusion? His voice was controlled but strained. He paced slowly as he listened. No, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking if errors ever occur. Another pause. I see. When he hung up, his jaw was tight. They said the process is standardized, he said. Samples are labeled immediately. Minimal room for error. Minimal. Not impossible. He looked at me. They're confident in their handling. I nodded. He exhaled sharply. That doesn't explain this. No, it didn't. He sat down heavily at the table. What if the first result was too early? He said. What if Sienna was pregnant, but it hadn't registered yet? Possible. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And what about you? We still need blood confirmation. Yes. His mind kept circling the same issue. Accuracy, not accountability. He did not ask how I felt about another woman possibly carrying his child. He did not acknowledge the humiliation of this situation. His focus remained on data, results, validation, and that was when I understood fully. The real fracture in our marriage wasn't the affair. It was emotional absence. He had abandoned vulnerability long before he touched someone else, and I had reached my limit of watching him search for proof at the expense of connection. That evening, after hours of speculation, Adrian turned toward me. There's something off about this, he said again. I can feel it. He wasn't wrong. I stood slowly. There is, I replied. He looked up. I held his gaze steadily. I switched the samples. The words were calm, precise. He blinked. What? At the clinic. I switched them. His face drained of color. You're joking. I'm not. He stood abruptly. You switched them? His voice rose slightly. Why would you do that? Because I needed to see who you were going to choose, I said evenly. He stared at me as if trying to process a language he didn't understand. You tampered with medical results. Yes. You manipulated everything. Yes. His chest rose and fell rapidly. You had no right. I stepped closer. And you had every right to seek proof somewhere else? The silence that followed was sharp. You tested me, he said slowly. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair. Stunned. You didn't trust me. I trusted your behavior, I replied. And your behavior told me everything. He looked shaken in a way I had never seen. Not angry. Disoriented. Because for the first time, he was no longer controlling the narrative. The following day, I went for blood confirmation. Adrian insisted on coming. The car ride was silent, not hostile. Heavy. He did not hold my hand in the waiting room. He sat upright, distant, absorbing the implications of what I had done. The nurse called my name. Blood drawn. Results expedited. We waited. This time, neither of us pretended optimism. We both understood the stakes. If the blood work came back negative, the illusion he had rebuilt would collapse entirely. If positive, the situation would complicate beyond repair. The doctor entered with a neutral expression. Your blood test confirms, she said gently. You are not pregnant. There it was. Final. Definitive. Adrian's shoulders fell. Not dramatically. Subtly. The proof he had clung to vanished in one sentence. In the parking lot, he leaned against the car and closed his eyes briefly. Weeks of restored confidence evaporated. When he looked at me again, there was no anger. Just realization. The certainty he needed had never been about a child. It had been about himself. And now, stripped of illusion, he had to face something far more uncomfortable. The truth about why he left emotionally, long before he left physically. But this wasn't the end, because the real conversation hadn't even started yet. We sat in the car outside the clinic longer than necessary. The engine was off, the windows slightly fogged from our breath. Neither of us reached for the door handle. Finally, Adrian spoke. I felt like less of a man. The words were quiet, stripped of pride. He kept his eyes forward as he said it. Every negative test, he continued, felt like something was wrong with me. Not medically, personally. I didn't interrupt. For 2 years I watched you go through injections, appointments, disappointment, and I couldn't fix it. I couldn't control it. I hated that. His jaw tightened. When Sienna said she might be pregnant, I didn't feel joy first. I felt relief. Relief. Relief that maybe it wasn't me. Relief that maybe I wasn't broken. He swallowed. I know how that sounds. It sounded honest. He turned toward me slowly. I wasn't chasing her. I was chasing proof. Proof that his body worked. Proof that he was capable. Proof that he could create something where he felt failure. I didn't realize how far I was drifting from you, he said. That part mattered, because emotional distance had come long before physical betrayal. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't blamed. He had retreated, and in that retreat, he left me alone with the same pain he claimed he was carrying. I didn't want to admit I felt weak, he said. Weak. There it was. Not lust. Not romance. Insecurity. For the first time in months, he wasn't defending himself. He was exposing himself. And that shifted the room in a way no test result ever could. I didn't switch the samples to punish you, I said quietly. He looked at me, uncertain. I did it because I needed to see something clearly. What? He asked. Whether you were choosing me or choosing fatherhood. He inhaled slowly. For 2 years, I stood beside you in clinics. I let my body become a schedule. I absorbed hormones. I held my tears until you fell asleep. I wasn't angry as I said it. Just honest. But when she thought she was pregnant, you were ready. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. You were ready to pivot, I continued. Ready to build a future somewhere else if it gave you certainty. I wasn't leaving you, he said. You were preparing to, I replied. That difference mattered. I stepped out of the car and leaned against the hood. He followed. I needed clarity because I couldn't keep living in that gray space, I said. I couldn't keep wondering if you were with me, out of love or habit. The sample switch wasn't about biology. It was about observation. When you believed I was pregnant, everything changed overnight, I said. You came home early. You touched me again. You planned a future. He looked down. And when you believed she was pregnant, you didn't look devastated, I added softly. You looked resolved. He flinched at that. I needed to know who you were when the outcome felt certain, I said. Because love should not depend on proof. The test exposed him. But it also exposed us. And clarity, even when uncomfortable, is better than quiet doubt. We returned home that evening without speaking much. Later, in the kitchen where this entire confrontation had begun, Adrian leaned against the counter and said, I thought I was protecting us. From what? I asked. From feeling inadequate. That was the root. Instead of admitting vulnerability, he chose performance. Instead of saying, I'm scared I can't give you this, he sought confirmation elsewhere. That's ego, I said gently. He didn't argue. I equated fatherhood with worth, he admitted. If I couldn't give you a child, I felt replaceable. And so you replaced me emotionally first, I said. The room fell silent. Intimacy requires exposure, not proof. When he stopped sharing his insecurity, he stopped sharing himself. He thought silence was strength. It wasn't. It was distance. I didn't need you to be perfect, I told him. I needed you to be present. He nodded slowly, and I was so focused on not failing that I failed anyway. That realization hurt him more than my accusation ever could. This confrontation wasn't explosive. It was sobering. Ego isolates. Intimacy connects. He had chosen isolation, and I had responded with strategy. Neither of us had chosen vulnerability. That was the missing piece. And if we were going to rebuild anything, pride had to shrink. Because marriage does not survive performance. It survives honesty. Did you love her? I asked. The question wasn't dramatic. It was direct. He shook his head immediately. No. Then what was it? He took a moment before answering. Validation. The word hung between us. She made me feel capable, he continued. Not because of romance. Because of possibility. Possibility of fatherhood. Possibility of proof. He hadn't fallen in love with her. He had fallen in love with what she represented. You weren't competing with her, he said. You were competing with my fear. That stung in a different way. I didn't want to compete, I replied. I wanted partnership. He nodded. I confused love with validation, he admitted. When I thought you were pregnant, I felt restored. I felt strong again, and I mistook that feeling for closeness. That explained the sudden transformation. It wasn't renewed affection. It was renewed confidence. And when the blood test came back negative, he said quietly, I felt empty again. Because the proof disappeared. Love remains steady without proof. Validation does not. Do you love me without a child? I asked. Yes, even if we never have one. He hesitated, then answered honestly, yes. That pause mattered. But so did the answer. Love must survive uncertainty. Otherwise, it is attachment to outcome, and outcome is never guaranteed. We can't fix this alone, I said. He didn't resist. For once, he didn't try to solve it himself. I agree, he replied. The next week, we sat in a counselor's office across from a woman who listened more than she spoke. We recounted everything. The infertility, the silence, the affair, the switch, the collapse. She didn't rush to judge either of us. Instead, she asked questions neither of us had considered. When did you stop feeling safe sharing weakness? She asked Adrian. When did you start carrying resentment quietly? She asked me. Those questions landed harder than accusations. We began uncovering patterns. His need for control. My tendency to internalize pain without confrontation. The counselor didn't focus on the pregnancy. She focused on communication. You both avoided vulnerability, she said. In different ways. He sought proof. I sought clarity. Neither of us chose transparency. Counseling forced us to sit in discomfort without escaping. No validation, no manipulation, just truth. The process was not instant repair. Some sessions ended in silence. Others in tears. But for the first time in 2 years, we were speaking about fear instead of pretending it didn't exist. And that felt like a beginning. Not a guarantee, but a direction. The final step was unavoidable. He had to cut contact. Not quietly, not vaguely, completely. He called Sienna with me in the room. I can't continue any communication outside of work, he said. And even that will be transferred. His tone was steady, professional, clear. She didn't argue. Perhaps she had already understood that what connected them was not love. It was opportunity. He informed his firm that he would be reassigning her account. No secrecy. No half measures. Boundaries for the first time were visible. After the call ended, he placed his phone on the table. Unlocked. Face up. Not as a performance. As a reset. Trust does not return overnight. But accountability builds foundation. I don't want validation from anyone else, he said quietly. I want intimacy here. That statement felt different from earlier promises. Less dramatic. More grounded. The real test was never pregnancy. It was whether we could confront ego without destroying each other. We are not perfect now. We are not perfect now. We are rebuilding. Slowly. Some days feel steady. Others, fragile. But, when he reaches for my hand now, it is not because of proof. It is because of presence. And that difference is everything. Rebuilding did not begin with grand gestures. It began with small routines. Adrian started coming home at the same time every evening. Not because I demanded it, because he chose consistency. We began eating dinner at the table again, instead of in separate rooms. Phones stayed away. Conversations were slower, less defensive. Counseling sessions continued weekly. Some weeks felt productive. Others exposed wounds we didn't realize were still open. Trust did not return with apologies. It returned in patterns. He began checking in without being prompted. Not just about work, about emotion. How are you feeling today? Became a real question, not a polite one. I answered honestly, even when the answer was uncomfortable. We also addressed the infertility directly. No more pretending it didn't shape us. No more avoiding the topic when it hurt. There were evenings when silence felt heavy. But it was no longer avoidance. It was processing. We learned to sit in discomfort without escaping. He admitted when insecurity resurfaced. I admitted when resentment did. That honesty slowed everything down. Rebuilding felt less like romance and more like discipline. Love was no longer assumed. It was practiced, not dramatic, not theatrical. Steady. Some nights, we lay in bed without touching. Other nights, we reached for each other carefully, as if relearning familiar ground. We were not restored overnight. We were reconstructing, and reconstruction is slower than collapse. But for the first time in years, we were building on awareness instead of illusion. Trust, once fractured, does not return as confidence. It returns as caution. In the beginning, I questioned small things. If his phone buzzed, I noticed. If he ran late, I asked. Not aggressively, but directly. He answered without irritation. That mattered. He offered transparency without being prompted, shared details about meetings, introduced boundaries at work openly. The secrecy that once existed dissolved intentionally. Still, fragile trust meant I sometimes woke up anxious. The memory of the message still lived in me. I'm late. I'm scared. 3 words had exposed months of deception. Now, rebuilding meant creating safety where doubt once lived. He did not demand immediate forgiveness. He understood that forgiveness grows gradually. We also discussed what accountability meant long-term. It meant consistency. It meant choosing openness over ego. It meant recognizing that insecurity does not justify betrayal. Some evenings, I asked questions I had avoided before. What were you feeling that night? What made you think you couldn't tell me? He answered slowly, not defensively. And with every honest response, a small layer of tension lifted. Fragile trust is uncomfortable. It forces both people to remain aware. But awareness is better than complacency, because complacency is where distance begins. And we had already seen what distance could do. The way he touched me changed. Before, affection had become functional, scheduled, goal-oriented. Now, it was deliberate. When he reached for my hand in public, it felt intentional, not possessive, not performative. At home, he stood behind me while I cooked and wrapped his arms around my waist. No urgency attached, no expectation, just presence. One night, we sat on the balcony, watching the ocean shift under evening light. He placed his hand over mine and said, "I don't want to prove anything anymore. I want to be present." That sentence carried weight. Physical closeness returned gradually. Without pressure tied to ovulation charts or fertility windows, we allowed intimacy to exist without outcome. For the first time in a long time, affection did not feel like strategy. It felt like connection. I also allowed myself to lean into him again. Trusting touch after betrayal requires courage, but withholding touch out of fear creates distance. So we chose vulnerability, not recklessly. Carefully, we spoke openly about fear of future disappointment. We acknowledged that infertility might remain part of our story, but fatherhood would no longer define his worth, and motherhood would no longer define mine. The absence of a child was no longer treated as failure. It was treated as uncertainty, and uncertainty does not erase love unless ego demands proof. Healing required difficult conversations, not once, repeatedly. We spoke about pride, about identity, about how society pressures men to equate masculinity with performance. He admitted how deeply that pressure shaped him. "I felt replaceable," he said once. "Like if I couldn't give you a child, you would eventually resent me." "I didn't need perfection," I replied. "I needed honesty." We also addressed my decision directly. "You crossed a line," he told me one evening. "Yes," I agreed. "I understand why. But it hurt." That mattered too. My clarity came through manipulation, and while it exposed truth, it also damaged trust. We both owned our parts. He owned the affair. I owned the deception. Neither minimized the other. We discussed boundaries moving forward, transparency, emotional check-ins, individual therapy. These conversations were not dramatic. They were layered, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes quiet, but each one removed another layer of denial. Marriage is not sustained by passion alone. It is sustained by accountability, and accountability requires confronting your own flaws before pointing at someone else's. We were no longer trying to win. We were trying to understand, and understanding is slower than accusation, but far more sustainable. Months passed. Sienna's pregnancy remained uncertain. Initial tests were inconsistent, dates unclear, paternity not confirmed. Adrian had no further involvement beyond formal communication through legal channels. Distance became permanent. Her situation no longer felt like competition. It felt like consequence. For all three of us. I learned through indirect updates that the timeline did not align cleanly. Possibilities extended beyond Adrian. That revelation stripped the affair of any illusion of destiny. It was not fate. It was fear colliding with opportunity. Adrian did not gloat. He did not express relief publicly. Instead, he reflected privately. "I almost destroyed everything for proof," he said one night. Yes, he had, but so had I, in my own way. We both chased certainty in unhealthy forms. Him through validation, me through control. The collapse of illusion was painful, but necessary, because illusion allows pride to survive. Truth forces humility. Sienna faded from our daily conversation, not erased, but no longer central. Her presence in our story became a reminder of what insecurity can do when left unspoken, a reminder that avoidance creates distance faster than conflict, and a reminder that clarity sometimes comes at a cost. Looking back, I understand something clearly. The pregnancy was never the real test. Character was. When certainty appeared, Adrian revealed his priorities. When doubt returned, he revealed his fear. And when confronted with truth, he revealed his humanity. I crossed a line to expose something I could no longer ignore. He crossed a line to protect something he felt losing. Both actions carried consequences, but the real transformation came when we stopped defending and started admitting. Marriage is not saved by children. It is not secured by proof. It is sustained by presence, by vulnerability, by choosing honesty when pride feels safer. So let me ask you directly, would you have switched the samples? Do you believe Adrian deserves forgiveness? If you've ever felt replaced, sidelined, or overshadowed by someone else's insecurity, share your story below. Your experience matters. Like this video, if you believe love requires accountability, share it with someone who needs clarity in their own relationship. And subscribe to Twisted Love Tales with Mr. Easton for stories that test love and truth. Because sometimes the real question isn't who is pregnant, it's who is present, and that answer defines everything.